Well, the first gospel written, according to the scholars, is the Gospel of Mark, written probably around the year 70, written most likely in Rome because Mark had been a confrere of St. Peter in his last years in Rome. Mark's gospel is fascinating from a number of angles. What I want to do is simply focus on the opening line, because Mark's opening line is a bit like, "Call me Ishmael" from Moby Dick, or it's a line that sets the tone for the whole story. In some ways, the whole gospel is contained in the opening line. So take a look here. Mark 1:1, the opening line. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's the opening line. The beginning, arche, is the word that he uses in Greek. Well, of course, for any biblical person, the word beginning is a charged word. Why? Because the opening line of the entire Bible is Bereshith in Hebrew. In the beginning. It's the signal for creation. St. John will echo this, right? A few years later when he writes his gospel, and he says, En arche en ho logos. In the beginning was the word. And then John tells this wonderful story that harkens back to Genesis all the time. Arche, Bereshith, the beginning, the beginning. This gospel will be a story not just of a clever guru, a great teacher, a moral philosopher. So Plato tells the story of Socrates, and he's a great hero and a philosopher. But there's so much more going on because this is a story of new creation, of a whole world being remade. And to get that is to get Christianity. We're not just a new moral system. You could say we are that. You could distill that from Christianity. But fundamentally, it's about a new world. Arche, the beginning. The beginning of what? Of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, there's that equally charged word in Mark's Greek, euangelion, which means glad tidings. It does harken back to Isaiah. So the prophet Isaiah says to the exiles returning from Babylon, I have glad tidings for you. But in Mark's world at this time, euangelion in the secular world was a term they used to describe an imperial victory. So when the emperor, one of his generals, won a battle, he would send messengers, right? Angelos just means messenger in Greek. Send an angel, a messenger, with the euangelion, the good news of this imperial victory. So St. Mark, mind you, writing in Rome, most likely, in the belly of the beast, in the center of the great empire, is saying, I've got the real story of an imperial victory, which has nothing to do with Caesar, but in fact with someone whom Caesar killed, this obscure rabbi from where? Nazareth? In the dusty corner of the Roman Empire? But he, in fact, has won the true imperial victory. So the beginning of the gospel, the euangelion, of whom? Of Jesus Christ. In his Greek, Jesus Christos. So first of all, Jesus. It's a Hellenized version, the Greekified version of Yehoshua in Hebrew. Yehoshua, which means Yahweh saves. God, the God of Israel, saves. This will be a story of an imperial victory which amounts to the salvation of the people. More to it, first century Jew reading this and hearing Jesus, Yehoshua, is thinking right away of another Yehoshua, an Old Testament figure, Moses' sort of aide-de-camp, who became his successor. Moses liberates the people from slavery, brings them to the threshold of the promised land, but then he entrusts Yehoshua with the job of conquering the promised land. We know him, of course, as Joshua. So Joshua enters the promised land as a great military commander, and he subdues the enemies of Israel and establishes them in the land. So someone reading this text is thinking, okay, this is a story about a great victory, and it's led by a new Joshua who's going to bring the people into a promised land having conquered its enemies. Now, this Jesus has a title in Mark's Greek, Christos. Now, Christos means the anointed one. It translates the Hebrew Mashiach. So what he's saying here is, this is the beginning of the good news, the glad tidings about Yehoshua Mashiach, Joshua, Yahweh saves, who's also the anointed one. Now, who are the anointed ones in the Hebrew tradition? They were the kings of Israel. The kings were anointed. But who was the Mashiach, the anointed one, par excellence? It was David. We know the famous story when the prophet Samuel anoints David as king. And we hear that the spirit, the ruach of Yahweh, the spirit of Yahweh, rushed upon David. And David then becomes the great imperial king of Israel, defeating the nation's enemies and establishing Israel as a great empire, setting the tone for the building of the temple, etc., etc. David is the great king. So it's getting even more interesting. You see, imagine, we've read this now a million times. It's been around for 2,000 years. But imagine you're reading this text for the first time. What is this now? The beginning of good news about a Joshua figure and a David figure. This is a really charged, for a Hebrew person, really charged story is going to unfold. There'll be a victory. It'll establish Israel in its land. Okay. But now keep in mind, Mark is writing in Rome. He speaks Greek, certainly, probably some Latin. Most likely he himself is a Jew with a Hebrew background. But he knows the Roman world as well. And the giveaway is the last little phrase. So the beginning of the good news about Yehoshua Mashiach, and then he calls him in his Greek, Weos Tuteu, the Son of God. Well, Weos Tuteu was an imperial title. Go back to the time of Julius Caesar, right, who seizes power, and then he's killed in the Roman Senate, and the great tumult ensues. But his adopted son, Augustus, becomes emperor. Well, upon Caesar's death, he's declared divus. He's declared divine, or a god. And so when Augustus becomes the ruler of Rome, he takes the title Weos Tuteu, son of the god. And then his successors, Tiberius and Claudius, the other ones, they receive that title. They also become the Weos Tuteu, the son of the god. So it was like the highest title the Roman emperor had. He participated in the pantheon of the gods, son of the god. Look what Mark is doing and how edgy and how provocative it is. In the belly of the beast, in the heart of the empire, he refers to Yehoshua Mashiach as the Weos Tuteu. The real Son of God is not Caesar, but this Jesus whom Caesar killed. Do you see why a lot of the first Christians spent a lot of their time in jail, and why a lot of them were persecuted, were done to death? And how this man, whoever he was, we don't know that much about Mark, but this genius who wrote this text, and begins it in the most provocative way possible, stirring up Jews and Gentiles, alerting to Jews, boy, a new Joshua, a new David, imperial victory. And then also taunting, even mocking the Romans. No, you're Caesar. He's not the Weos Tuteu. This one is the Son of God. Now, and here's what makes the whole thing so delicious and so ironic. What is this victory? What is this imperial victory which merits the title euangelion, good news, making this guy the Weos Tuteu, the Son of God? It's this crucified figure, crucified, but raised from the dead through the power of Yahweh. And now Yehoshua, Yahweh saves. Now Yahweh, who is the God of Joshua and David, Yahweh who wins his imperial victory precisely in this figure, who is now King of Kings, more powerful than the Emperor of Rome. There's all in the opening line of Mark's Gospel, giving away the trajectory of this great story. And it's still a story that shakes the world.